Hi, I'm your Gemini friend. So this video is going to be about house systems, specifically in Western tropical astrology. So what I want to go over is focusing on quadrant house systems like Placidus and non-quadrant house systems like whole sign, and what the benefits are of each, why someone might choose one over the other, and why we can really use both, because both systems are just prioritizing different things, creating a different style of interpretation. And maybe this can help you figure out what your preference is and why. And I already made this video. I made a video going over a bunch of different house systems, but it just got really complicated and I was like, I don't know. So I'm just starting over and really focusing on that quadrant, non-quadrant, because the main differences I see are people using Placidus, which tends to be the default for a lot of chart calculation sites, and then whole sign, which many people are familiar with, a lot of people use. The Pattern app uses it. And I offer personal natal chart readings and synastry readings, and I'm always happy to take house sign preferences into account. I've done readings in different house signs than people are used to, experimental combination readings, and the message always comes out essentially the same. Even with different placements, the overall energy of a person and the message that they're meant to get, what they're focusing on, it can depend on the house system what focus we're getting, but I think that people's preferences really line up with the timing and what place in life they're in and what's going on in their life, their personal timing. I feel like we will discover different house systems, different interpretations to the same placements that we're familiar with based off of what we need to be focusing on at that time. Our placements evolve, and they're meant to. I mean, if you have like a hard placement that you've been working on, it's not going to be anywhere near the same as it was when you started. Placements evolve, we evolve, interpretations evolve. That's why looking at your chart in different house systems, switching around, and even like if you don't like a placement in one house system over the other, it can still be helpful to look into it and be like, why is this here? So, okay, what I want to start with when saying quadrant and non-quadrant house systems. Quadrant house systems take the angles into account in the calculation. Some quadrant house systems are Placidus, Koch, which is kind of my personal favorite, Campanus, Regiomontanus, which is more for horary astrology. So it needs that nuance, it needs the timing. The time is very important here. But with non-quadrant systems like whole sign, equal houses, these still use the ascendant to determine the first house, but it's not considering the ascendant, descendant, MCIC. Those are not taken into account as much because the focus of these non-quadrant systems is to essentially have equally sized houses. So let's get into more why. So a quadrant system like Placidus takes the time and the location of your birth into account in a much more specific way for the calculation of the house divisions. So at the time and location of birth, the ascendant is going to be determined by the point of the zodiac sign that's rising on the eastern horizon. The time is important because the Earth's rotation is what causes the zodiac signs to rise and set, and then our location, it takes our latitude and longitude into account in order to create the sizes of the houses. We're dividing these 4 quadrants into 3 houses each based off of these calculations. And each house system is going to have a slightly different way of calculating, and that is determined by like kind of the focus of the house system. And ones like Placidus, Koch, topocentric, these are more psychologically focused. The nuance that's caused by how time sensitive everything is, it's creating these dynamics and the ways that zodiac signs will fall anywhere within a house cusp, creating a lot of complexity and like really specific placements to the individual. The way that you can have a sign on the cusp of the house and then the planets within the house are under the next sign. This can be very representative of the confusing human experience, the way that our psychology is messy. We can take these placements and just like keep going deeper and deeper. And then the focus on the angles, this is like the most impactful areas of life. This represents our internal and external selves and our relationship with self and others. So the way that these angles are really considered to be especially significant by starting these houses, determining where these areas of life begin, it adds a greater understanding of like life overall and our timing, our progression, our personal evolution. And then another thing with the nuance of the timing is that more predictive sorts of readings, like I said, horary readings, these are done like at that specific time. You interpret the chart to answer a question. So obviously the very specific timing, and a lot of the times also our specific perspective, like looking at the sky from where we are on Earth, can really play a part here. Looking at non-quadrant houses, the priority here is more clarity and like equal divisions, creating proportion and balance, and ultimately consistency. So the way that a house system like whole sign is determined, whatever sign your ascendant is going to become the whole first house. It's going to start at the first degree of that sign, and then the next house is going to be the entire next sign, all 30-degree houses, each with one ruler. It simplifies it and makes it more easy to like generalize and also pick up on broader archetypes. It's more clear and direct because you're equating one sign with one house. There's not the complexity and the potential confusion that can happen with much more complicated placements. And then equal houses, it's very similar. It's these same equal 30-degree houses, but it's taking the degree of the ascendant and making that the beginning of the first house. And then everything beyond then is going to be that 30-degree division for both the signs and the houses. So this can help with like having the chart be more predictable. You can look at one placement and knowing which sign is on which, knowing which sign represents which house, you can essentially predict the placements. This actually puts a lot more focus on the aspects and like the sign placement, the rulerships, and it creates a more clear-cut version of that energy. So what you can see in yourself is like clear archetypes, the uniformity. It's like big picture things. It's more generalized, but it's not simple. It's still very specific to you. And this can feel more intuitive for some people, and it takes away that overcomplicatedness that can sometimes just take up a lot of time. You could spend so much time on any specific placement when it's in a weird spot, when it's mixed in two different energies. This can also give you a lot of insight when it comes to like the planetary function within the signs, without how complicated it can get when you have a different sign on that house cusp. If you just see more straightforward, this planet is in this house and in this sign. Basically, I see this as very helpful for like decision making. If you have to decide something based off of a part of you, sometimes you can arrive at the right answer much quicker with a less complicated chart. And this can also be very enlightening for our identity and our sense of like self-expression. It can show us in a more general way how we express this energy. So it really all comes down to preference. Some people prefer patterns. Some people prefer the uncomplicated directness of the sign house rulership being this way. Personally, I love it when things get complicated. It makes my mind go all sorts of places, and that depth, it feels like it adds so much. But I can absolutely see how somebody can go too deep and get too hung up on something, too lost in that complexity. So that's why I really feel like both types of house systems are so useful. I feel like we can really get something out of both. And it's also really important to note, like, if you only relate to one placement, say a whole sign placement, but not your Placidus placement, because it just feels wrong, that's relevant too. It's all personal. It's your chart, your energies. It's all about you. So your preferences are super important, in recognizing these preferences. Sometimes it can even be enlightening to see, why do I relate to this but not to that? This is all a tool. It's a tool for us to discover and explore ourselves and find the best possible expressions for our natural energy. We shouldn't all be expected to be the same, like, perfect way to be. We all have our totally different nuanced placements, are parts of ourselves that are hard to describe, but then astrology shows us and it validates us. It's like, oh, this thing that I've always been it's been a struggle. Well, here's why. I have this aspect, or this planet is in detriment. It's all the answers. It's amazing. And I feel like experimenting and not getting too attached to any particular system can be really helpful. But at the same time, you do you. It's totally up to you. I just hope that this can be informative as to like why I use the house systems that I use. I use Placidus because, like I said, it tends to be the default for most chart calculators, and I figure those are going to be the placements that people relate to the most, the ones that they're familiar with. But at the same time, I recognize a ton of people use whole sign, and I'm always happy to do a reading in whole sign too. And I said before that Coke is actually my favorite. Coke is the system that I used when teaching myself astrology, and it feels only very different from Placidus, to be honest. All of these, depending on how extreme a latitude you were born at, sometimes it's not going to make a difference. Sometimes everything is exactly the same, but that's why there are so many different house systems. There are calculation adjustments for people who were born at extreme latitudes, because your houses are going to be like really small and really big. That unevenness can really be bothersome. But I guess this is just encouragement to like look at your chart in different house systems, see how you feel, see if there's anything new you can learn. There's always something new in your chart. I swear, I will never stop finding new things in my chart. It's so weird, but this is related to our evolution. We're meant to grow, and this is just such a helpful tool. I love it. So I hope that this is helpful. Please feel free to tell me however you feel about house systems, whatever you think. I'm very curious. And I also think it's fascinating that we can resonate with different placements. It's all layers. It's all like reaching different parts of us, bringing them to light. So thank you so much for watching. I love you. Bye.